Second last speaker of the day, Antoine Grondin from WebScale, will talk to us about structured logging. Defeated at the last moment. Go ahead, thanks. You got a mic?
Yeah, mic, please. Hi, I'm Antoine Grondin. Today I want to talk about something pretty simple, just an idea. It's called structured logging. I think it's more well-known now than it used to be, but not everybody knows about it, and I think it's very useful, so I just want to talk about it. And yeah. So a little bit about me. My name is Antoine Grondin. I'm an engineer, mostly work on distributed systems. French-Canadian, I live in Seoul, and at night I deliver GPUs for an AI hyperscaler. And during the day, I hack on humanlog.io, which is a CLI tool for structured logs that I made a while ago. And I love coffee shops, brunching, sailing. That's a little bit about me. So how I'm going to assume you log today? Probably you're printfing strings. So if you use like %s, you put words into things. All the code examples here are in Go, because that's the main language I use. And how I think people should mostly not log is by printf logging. So what is structured logging? Basically, structured logging is when you don't printf your strings. Everything you keep, like all the things you would printf, like use %d or %s, you keep as key values. So for example, you would log the address of the thing that's serving an RPC. In this way, you would keep the key value. And then this would emit JSON on standard error or log fump. There's different formats. In this manner. So you just keep the address here. It's not turned into other things. So for example, if you would previously log a request, the amount of data that was logged by a request in this way, to do it in structured manner, you would do it as is shown here. Same thing, if you have errors, just log the errors individually, keep the data separated, keep the key values separated. So why would you do this? Why does it matter? Well, it's easier to process programmatically, because when you printf your values inside of a string, and when you want to get the data back, you need to parse the strings. And usually it's human-readable string, it's not machine-readable stuff. And I would argue that, for the most part, logs are for machines first. Mostly, what I mean by this is that logs go through a bunch of machines before they end up in the eyes of any operator. And you want to do all kinds of stuff with your logs most of the time, except when you're iterating just locally on your own machine. And you can always make your logs prettier at the end. Like if you have a bunch of ugly JSON, you can just shove it into some tool that colorizes them, makes them pretty, which is this CLI tool I built a while ago. So it looks like this, for instance. If you have a log file, you just shove it in there, it's going to make stuff pretty. You don't need to make it pretty by default. You can make it pretty later. So for instance, this is just logs from services running in Kubernetes. They log in JSON, which is kind of unreadable. It's very useful. But if you pipe this into a tool that makes it pretty, it just looks better with some colors and stuff. So you don't need to like detect if standard output is a TTY and then turn on colors or stuff like that. You can just add it later. So once you have nice logs in JSON or log font or something, you can do all kind of cool stuff with this much more easily than if you need to use regex. So for instance, something I did a while ago, I worked at another cloud provider. It's called DigitalOcean, and we had like a bunch of hypervisors everywhere. And the gimmick of DigitalOcean at the beginning was selling SSDs for very cheap. But all the SSDs on the hypervisors were very expensive, and we wanted to sell all the space for it. But every time we had to download disk image, it would take a while, and people wanted to create VMs quickly. So I wanted to introduce a cache on all hypervisors, but it was a touchy subject because we don't want to use SSDs for caching. So what I did is I pulled all of the logs for the last 6 months, and I built a little simulation and replayed the logs against the simulation to prove what would have happened if we had had a cache in place. And this was pretty easy to do because all the logs were easy to work with because they were all kept in JSON format. So I think that's just an example of what's great about keeping your data structured without losing all the meaning. And when you do this, you can, you don't need to go fancy. You can just shove all of your logs in a database. It could be Postgres or a column-oriented database. Or you can use fancy tools like Splunk or Kibana, which is out of flavor now. Grafana, low-key, or human log, which is what I'm working on. And then you can graph this. This graph is meaningless. It's just to, I don't know, demonstration. And also it's from Cubana like 10 years ago. So. But basically the message is don't lose the inherent structure in your data. When you're in your program, you've got variables with names and values. You don't shove all your variables into one string and then index into that string when you want to refer to something. So why do the same thing with your logs? Just keep the structure in an easily captured format. So how would you do it? Well, first of all, don't format the message, obviously. Just keep a plain string with no interpolation or sprintfing. And log everything that's useful in the context as a key value. I would say there's the other formats you can log, like log FMT or XML. I would say just log in JSON because in the case of log FMT, there's no formal grammar for like how to parse this format. So there's also not many parsers in all languages, but every language almost on Earth has a JSON parser. So you can use it anywhere. In terms of language supports, there's a lot of libraries that do this. This is just a couple, just in case you didn't want to Google. It's easy. Just Google your language structured logging, and you'll find it. These are loggers that do this. And then use it in your project. If you have a project where you're currently doing sprintf logging, especially if it's something that's distributed, like Logger, Docker used to be like this, Prometheus, all kinds of open source projects. If you can switch them to structured logging and it makes sense in your case, it would be nice for the rest of the people. When not to use it, there are cases where it doesn't always make sense. Mostly when it's actually only a human that's going to look at it. For instance, the CLI output. But even then, quite often you want to pipe your CLI output into other tools. So if you keep a nice structure, if you have like a flag to change the format to JSON, that's always very useful. And just finally, I talked about human log, the CLI I made a long time ago. I always wanted to have a search engine in it to be able to do more things without having to reach production. So I started hacking more on it a couple of months ago and turned it into a fully featured like Splunk-like engine, but on your machine. So this is very alpha software, but if you want to give it a spin, it's super broken, but any feedback is going to be great. And yeah, I'd love to know. You can look it up here if you're interested. I'll leave this here for a couple seconds. And if you want to learn more or chat with me, these are my contact informations. And that's the end. Thank you so much.
Very cool, thank you.
Thank you.
I've spent more hours of my life than I wish to admit dealing with badly presented logs. I have a specific question. You suggested not using this for CLI type logs.
If you write a CLI tool and you want, it's just for users.
Oh, it's for users. Okay, I get it.
Just like it goes straight into a user's face.
Unless you put like the batch mode parameter.
Yeah, so that's what I meant with like, let's say kubectl, like a kubectl, as a -o flag, you can make it print in JSON or YAML, for example. But by default, it prints.
Default is for humans. Yeah, okay, got it. Good idea. Right. Any other questions from people who have wasted years of their lives struggling with logs?
OpenTelemetry standardizes certain keys. Does human log pay attention to that, like traces or trace IDs?
Not yet, but I'm very aware of OpenTelemetry. I started this thing before it became a thing, but yeah, it can parse it. And I want, right now, human log only deal with logs, but the second thing I want to do is tracing, because when you iterate on your machine and you like make a service and they talk to each other, usually you cannot see your traces unless you set up Jaeger or like some other like thing. It's super complicated in the Docker Compose. Most people just ship their software to prod and then look at their traces and then iterate this way. But like your iteration loop there is like 20 minutes or something. Like it should be seconds. And I want human log later to do distributed tracing. But we're starting with logging. Yeah. And OpenTelemetry, of course. Thank you.
We do have plenty of time, so if there are other... Perhaps not.
I've got stickers, and I think we have some extra T-shirts. If people want, we like T-shirts, so we made some fun ones.